Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining and welcome to this little webinar that we're doing on the debrief of the PCST 2023 conference in Rotterdam. I presume most of you know everyone who's in this room, but just quickly in case you don't, my name's Tom. I'm one of the two co-presidents of the Australian Science Communicators, along with Joanna, who's also on the line. I'm tuning in from Malta, because I haven't made it back from the PCST conference yet. I'm still in Europe. And so I'm also not entirely familiar with the internet connection that I have here in this accommodation. So if I do drop out at any moment throughout today, Joanna is going to jump in and continue the hosting. But I'm hopeful that that won't happen or won't need to happen. I will, even though I'm not currently, I would normally be tuning in from Ngunnawal land. And I do want to just pay my respects and acknowledge that that's the space that I generally live, work, and play on. And it's such a pleasure. And it's been a wonderful experience while I've been over here in Europe to share some photos from that Canberra region to the people that I'm meeting here, and to speak to people about the beauty of what Australia is. We have been joined here today by four wonderful guests who have all joined, who all went to the PCST conference earlier this last month, because we've just clicked over to the 1st of May, so it was last month. And so on the line, I'll throw to them in just a moment, but before I do that, I'll give a 2-second or maybe a few more background on what the PCST is and where and what the conference was all about. So the PCST, which is a public communication of the Network for the Public Communication of Science and Technology, is somewhat similar to the ASC, but internationally focused. They have a scientific committee, which is similar to our executive committee in some ways, but they have specific rules around where those people can come from and what roles they play. There's been a lot of change in the PCST in recent months and years, where they've gone through a fairly significant professionalization process. They've created a number of rules that apply, and this year the conference that they held was held in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. We are fortunate to have Tos on the line with us today. He's one of the outgoing scientific committee members and hugely influential in the work of making the organisation tick and run and sustainable. So that's I'll leave my background of PCST there because I'm sure that Tos can add to any further than that. But what I will do right now is, if I might, Tos, if you're happy for me to throw to you first, I might just get each of our panelists to briefly introduce yourself and your context of the PCST, and maybe just a couple of minutes of your overall impressions of the conference before we go into a couple of questions. Tos, did you want to start us off?
Okay, so I've been with my first PCST conference was in Montreal in 1994, and that was the meeting that selected Melbourne to run the fourth of the PCST conferences, and I've been essentially on the committee ever since then, and ended up overseeing some dramatic shifts in PCST. One was to move from a fairly narrow European base of France and Spain and become international. We had conferences in Asia, in Korea first, in South America, as well as Australia. We've also been to Turkey and so on. And so I think that that's one of the wonderful things that PCST has done over the last few years, is to spread itself around the world. So it is a global network. And so now we have members from about 50 or 60 countries. I'm now stepping down off the committee, having written the constitution, which meant that members have to stand down after serving 2 terms, and we became a democratic organisation with a constitution and a bank balance in 2014, and so that meant that now was time for me to step aside, and the whole new lovely generation of people have taken over. So I'll leave it there, Tom.
Thanks, Toss. So clearly this is not your first rodeo with PCST conferences, but perhaps I'll throw over to Sam next. Was this your first PCST conference?
So technically it was my first one in person, but I hosted. I was the chair of a panel on the online 2021, scheduled for 2020, and they did an online version in 2021. And I have been a member of PCST for a while, but it was my first time going in person. But I have to keep reminding myself that it was the first time I'd been in person, because, yeah, a lot of familiar faces and a lot of familiar sort of topics and discussions, which was really great. I don't know what other context is useful. I've also been around the ASC for a while. I know that some people in the participant list may know of me. I came down to Canberra to do postgraduate study and a PhD at ANU with CPAS, and now I am based up in Brisbane at QUT, working in communications, well, studying communications. Researching is the word. It's a public holiday here, is my excuse.
Jane, did you have any initial thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, it was my first PCST conference. So yeah, I thought it was great. I attended they had a pre-conference workshop on the Tuesday for first timers, which I went to. We played bingo as an icebreaker, which was fun. And that was, a really great way to kind of meet the other first timers. And we all kind of were a cohort. I felt throughout the conference, we'd say hi to each other when we saw each other and things like that. So I have been to the ASC conference in 2020, right as COVID was starting, but we did manage to all get together then. So I've been a member of ASC and PCST for a little while. And I kind of thought they asked for volunteers for PCST, for curators for the sub-themes of voice, which is values, openness, inclusion, collaboration, and expertise. And so I kind of volunteered to be a curator for the conference because I thought it would be a good way to kind of engage with the conference as a first timer and make me pay attention in all the sessions that I went to.
Well, we'll jump onto that in just a second, but before we do, Alice, how did you find your experience at PCST?
Thanks, Tom. So this was my second in-person PCST. The first one I attended was in Dunedin, so a little bit further to travel this time. It was a really great opportunity. I think I'd never been to the Netherlands before. I was born closer to the Netherlands than to Sydney, which is where I work now, but I hadn't been before. And it was a great location, a fantastic venue, that really, I think it really lent itself well to conversations and discussion in between the sessions, which is often the most enriching part of a conference. It's sharing ideas, hearing people's research, their practice, and then it's the conversations that tumble out of those lecture spaces or practice spaces that ignite collaboration or excitement. So that was really great. And it was fun to be going there this time. The first conference I went to is my first time entering this community, and this time to be returning with a wonderful PhD student that I work with in our team, Olivia, and to see her, having a panel and sharing some of our work. And it was also lovely to be part of a panel that launched a book edited by 2 Australian scholars, Dr. Lindy Orthia and Dr. Tara Robertson, about queering science communication. I think it was sort of a soft launch of this new book that they edited, for which I was really honoured to contribute some chapters. So overall, a fantastic experience, and great to see the community coming back together, and as Toss alluded to, the growing diversity of this community and its expansion into more and more countries, which is deeply enriching for this community, I think.
Yes, definitely, and it was a clear theme that I observed as well at the conference, were that there was an active effort to engage across a range of countries and contributors from different parts of the world, which is well and truly noted. And I know that doesn't come. But there's quite a lot of effort that goes into engaging in that, and there was quite a bit of discussion in the lead up to the conference around how to make sure that happened. All right, so thank you all. For those people who are online as our audience, I will just give you a prompt that if there are any questions throughout the session that you want to ask, please just throw it into the chat and I will feed that into our discussion. But we have prompted our panelists to think on a couple of questions before turning up here today, and so I'm going to look to some of those to start us off. So, Alice, I think you kind of alluded to this around some of the responses that the response you just made around some of the takeaways you got from PCST. But I would just give you the opportunity, if there was anything else you wanted to add specifically to, if there were any other main takeaways that you felt you really took away from this year's conference in Rotterdam.
So I found that the theme of the conference was creating common ground, and there were times for reflection on this too throughout the conference, but I really did feel like the theme of inclusivity ran quite strongly through the theme of the conference, both in what people were saying, who was saying it, and how it was being said, and in terms of the way people have integrated this into their practice, into their research. I think for me, a noticeable shift and a greater awareness of how crucial it is that we're thinking in the science communication space, not just about who we're reaching, but who is speaking, and in what position that they hold, which was great to see. I think for me, it's also, and I know this Australian science communicators live and breathe this stuff, but it's always exciting to see practice meeting theory. And if there are some ongoing, sometimes they feel like discussions that come up again and again in the community about how we better integrate research and practice. And I think there's still room for improvement there in terms of the way that we connect researchers, practitioners, or maybe the fluidity in terms of how people can move from being practitioner to researcher, and how we can encourage more reflexive practice. But for me, it was really great to hear some very strong practice-based sessions, in the same way that it was really fantastic to be challenged by leaders or emerging leaders in fields that are much more theoretical or conceptual. And I enjoyed the moving from one to the other fairly seamlessly, and thinking about something deeply critical and from a kind of a very sort of theoretical basis, and then moving into something that was much more of an arts-based approach or a different element of creativity. And I think increasingly seeing that we don't need to privilege one over the other, that both are important and crucial parts for our community in terms of understanding how we can better connect with science and technology.
Thanks, Alice. Sam, did you have any thoughts or particular takeaways from the conference?
I'm not quite sure about main takeaways, but I would say that one of the things, I would echo something that Alice said about sort of thinking about who you're talking to and when, and the conversations that come up again and again. One of the things I took away from the conference was that focus on communication and getting out to audiences that you like not to make too many assumptions about who's already sort of done, who needs to be, like where you need to move on to. I'm not articulating myself well. For example, there was quite a few talks throughout the whole conference of practitioners and professionals of various different fields. There were vets, people working at national parks from all over the place, really, really desperate for some answers, or some community or other people who had the same questions that they did, who thought that there were no answers out there, who sort of exhausted everyone around them and had come to PCST for answers. And I guess that sort of reminded me a lot of watching how insular you're being by accident, or making sure to make those connections and talk to people about, I guess, meeting them where they are, even if there are, we would watch those talks and think, oh, they're talking about this theoretical concept that we already know the answer to that. Not talking about it in their language sort of means that those connections aren't so easily made. That's very, very roundabout, but it was something I was thinking about.
Kos, did you have any reflections on what Sam was just saying, or any takeaways that you particularly struck chord with you?
The takeaways, well, I'll make some general observations about it, and I think the first one was it was great to see a good, strong Australian contingent there. I don't know how many Australians ended up there, but there was a combined photographic session, which unfortunately I missed, but I think there are about 20 people there. And it's just a reflection of how strong the Australian science communication effort is. I think the second thing is that it's wonderfully rewarding going to a conference like this, because you realise that in some ways the people you might have been daunted by looking at from overseas, looking from a far off colonial outpost of the empire, and suddenly you realise that the work you're doing is quite significant and it's equal and up with the best of what other people are doing. And so I think that the PCST network is such a rich pool of talent and ideas that it's impossible to go away from it unscathed and without taking something new back to your own practice, your own research, and quite often practice and research, because I think that many people involved there, including all our panelists today, are involved on both sides of that coin and shift seamlessly from practice to research and back again without even thinking about it. And practice which is informed by research is much stronger than practice without being informed by research.
Here. Jane, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo what the others have said. I was also going to make the point about all the Aussies that were there. Like, we definitely have a strong community of science communication here in Australia that was very strongly represented and in Rotterdam. I guess one of my main takeaways, which might sound a bit, simple, but it was quite powerful, is that we are all passionate about science. That's why we want to communicate about it in the best ways that we can. But then hearing from people from different countries and different communities, we all have different challenges in communicating, different fields of science and technology as well, physics versus astronomy and environmental science, etc. And we're all addressing this in different ways. It's not a one size fits all approach for sure. And that goes back to the inclusion and inclusivity points that Alice made. And I guess my next takeaway was this idea of third order communication, or a truly inclusive, participatory, co-designed, co-generation of knowledge approach, which is considered to be like the holy grail, where your audience or stakeholders or research users help design the research process. But this is going to look different depending on where you are, what community you're part of, etc. And I saw presentations from people using this approach from all over the world. So that was one of my takeaways too, just the advancement of the process of science communication, and just all the different ways that we use to communicate science, from working with kids and film and TV to comedy and visual arts, digital and tech applications, just seeing all those applications of those around the world was really inspiring. And we
Yeah, I
still don't
think,
have a global definition for science communication, and I don't think we
Yeah.
ever will either, because it's different for everybody.
Toss, you effectively wrote the book on that, right?
Well,
Around how that definition is quite different. Yes.
other people wrote the book. I just edited it, but I have it right here, as a matter of fact, just by coincidence. So it's good to meet authors, and so I was able to meet for the first time some of the authors of the book. I mean, there are 107 of them lurking around the globe, but it's a wonderful network of people and a resource to draw on. And I think perhaps I can echo Jane's comments here that I'm surprised how much I learn and how much I pick up and how much I have to stand back and marvel in awe at the competence of the people and who are involved in science communication, the different approaches they take and the different things they've been able to achieve. So you never don't learn going to a conference like this.
So I think the general theme that I'm hearing from here is that it was all in all a fairly positive and insightful experience that we've all had, and I would echo that as well. And so clearly some of the benefits that people might get from going is having their mind opened, or those networks. Jane, you specifically spoke to I think it was you that spoke to the venue. It really helped connect some of those people. Actually, no, that may have been Alice. You might have said, no, it was Jane. Oh my goodness. No, it wasn't. It was Alice. My internet connection is a little bit slow, so the non-verbals, yes, you're right, no, you're not, are about 30 seconds behind. So clearly there were some benefits. But I just want to make it relevant for any of the ASC members who might be online or see this recording later on, if they're thinking about going to PCST, perhaps in 2025 in Rotterdam. What should they be thinking about? What would you like to say to someone who is considering perhaps going over to Aberdeen? Alice, I might throw to you first.
Oh, well, I mean, I think if you can get there, do. I think it looks like it's going to be a fantastic conference, and I know we're all trying to be really mindful about how we travel and when we travel, and there are also lots of other considerations. So I know it's not possible for everybody, but if you can go there, I would say it was a very worthwhile meeting. I think probably in terms of before you go to a meeting like this, sometimes it's good to sort of do some of the reflections that we encourage students to do, as part of their assignments, to think about what is it that you would like to gain from attending a conference. Who would you like to maybe contact before, and make sure that you have time to have a coffee with them. I guess if there's any early career folks or students listening, or people who are new to the community, it can sometimes be a little bit daunting. So sometimes reaching out ahead of time to set up a coffee, or to set up a time to talk to somebody you'd really like to, is a good idea. I think we've also realised, as Jane mentioned and Sam mentioned, there's a very healthy and quite significant Australian contingent. So I think also in terms of building a connection, and I know ASC does a great job here, but strengthening this so that everyone would know some people going, and there's already a bit of a community. And if you're anything like me, the hardest thing I get at conferences is a great deal of FOMO, that I just can't decide which stream I want to go to. But if you have a team of people that you can even divide across different streams and come back together and share some of the things that you learned and split up in that way. And I think the other part is to just to feel welcome, no matter what your place or position in science communication is, whether you are new, whether you've been doing this for decades, whether you are a student, whether you're a practitioner, whether you run your own company, whatever you're doing, is to feel welcome by this community, and to know that you are welcome, and there is a place and a space for you at PCST. And as if there isn't a strong representation of the group or people that you need, by coming you can start to grow that too. So I just think that everyone should feel very welcome.
You're not wrong, Alice, about the FOMO. I think there were 9 parallel sessions through each of the well, through most of the parallel sessions. There were 9 different options you could choose. So there was you missed a whole lot more than you were able to physically attend, just simply because of the size of the conference and how busy it was. So definitely making friends before you get there and being a part of it. I completely agree with you. Jane, is there anything that you'd like to tell someone who's going to their first PCST, or what they might want to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think go to sessions, or go to some sessions that are not necessarily directly relevant or, you know, applicable to your work or your practice or your research. Just to hear about different things in different areas that people are working in is a really good way to really get a view of the breadth of the way science communication is being done across the globe. You know, try not to be so insular even within a conference, but to, you know, expand your horizons a little bit and go to a mixture of plenaries and mini workshops or problem solving sessions to participate actively, or sometimes you need a break and just go to a round table and sit and listen. But it's really good to have that mix, and maybe just to get outside your own kind of sphere of practice or research a little bit and listen to what other people are doing. And just, yeah, realizing that you're not in a vacuum. I think especially for new practitioners or people early in their career, it's such a good place to realize, you know, there's hundreds of people all over the world trying to do science communication, and learning from each other and understanding others' perspectives was a big benefit to me, even if it doesn't directly apply to my practice. You know, I definitely fall in the practitioner category. It's always good to know of the perspectives of others. It helps us as communicators, and it's always something to keep in mind when we're communicating is, you know, the perspectives of others. So I think that was one of the biggest benefits for me, and something that I would recommend others try to take part in for their first PCST next time.
And there was that.
Oh, and the Aussie
workshop
night at the pub was really good too. That informal
oh yeah,
Aussie night at the bar was pretty fun. We should do that again.
Yeah, definitely. And there were a couple of times where the Aussies would catch up for, like, I think a bunch of us caught up after the conference as well, to have a couple of drinks. But yeah, Sam, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? And perhaps, I mean, this was your first in-person conference. You had been to the online. Did you get any of the other online content the week before? Did anyone here attend any of the online stuff?
I did not. Tossed it. If you want to throw to him.
Yeah, I guess because I've just had that thought, because there was an online component to the conference in the week prior to the conference that happened the week after Easter. Toss, did you want to just give a quick overview as to what happened there and what your insight or thoughts were on the online aspect?
Okay, well, I chaired one of the online discussions, and it had 5 speakers. In fact, I chaired 2 of them. One had 6 speakers, one had 5 speakers. We had an audience of between 30 and 40 people each, which is interesting because that's rather more than many sessions had at the conference itself. So in fact, you'll probably get a better audience by going online and going beforehand. Otherwise, we were strict with the timing. People, I thought, spoke wonderfully well. There was an active discussion session at the end of it, and I think the online component really adds to things, particularly for people who aren't either financially or physically able to make it to the conference. And of course, for us, it's a $3,000+ airfare, trying to get from the Antipodes to there, and God knows how many tons of carbon dioxide and the rest of it. So, so the online component, I think, was very successful, and I think that there's going to be more of a future in that, because at the moment it's so expensive to get to the conference and partake in it by the time you pay fares and accommodation and registration fees, that there's going to be an increasing demand for online participation, and particularly from people from Africa, from Latin America, and from parts of Asia as well. It's the only option that they'd have. So I'd encourage you to participate in that way.
I wonder, Tos, do you think, because something that we've all been speaking about of the value of the conference was a lot of that informal networking that happens between sessions, or working with others to be able to go to manage a parallel session, for instance. This is not something that we necessarily have to deal with online, because sometimes conference organizers will record or leave a session available online later, so you could actually catch up. I'm just wondering whether or not you thought there was anything in particular from the PCST that worked really, really well that we could learn from around building some of that community during that online event, or was it largely just webinar based like we're doing right now?
I think it's a matter of accessibility, and I mean, if one of the sub themes of this conference was the notion of equity and diversity and access, and for some people, attending a conference is completely impossible. This year, the Kavli Foundation in the States offered funding. PCST chose to use that money to bring 6 people from Africa, Colombia, and from Croatia to the conference itself. But the cost of doing that was about $2,500 American dollars per person, and that's a huge expense. And if you parlayed that into putting that money into an online component, I mean, I think that it's always difficult to find a balance between online and in person. And you're right, there are huge advantages in being there in person, because you get to meet people, you can go and have a beer with them afterwards and so on. But against that, I think there's the cost component, which is just crippling to other people. So I still think we're looking for the right balance between online, in person, and that's something we all have to battle with.
Yeah, you're definitely not wrong there, Tos. And I am just noting in the chat, Karina was adding into here that one of the things that she felt was really useful was that she was able to attend the online workshops without having to attend the rest of the conference. And so I think that that's a very an important learning, is to recognize actually that segmentation of an event also increases accessibility. If someone doesn't have to book in for a 2-week process or a full week, then that might actually also increase our accessibility. Wes, thanks. Speaking from regional Australia, I totally concur with access and equity, including within Australia, and beer meeting is still important. And so hopefully this hasn't been too much of a PCST promotion campaign session, and also then gives us a reason to segue into why the ASC might still be an important membership for you to all hold, is that we will be still doing meetings here in Australia, which might be a little bit easier for you to get to, rather than Aberdeen and waiting all the way till 2025 for that. All right, I have a couple more questions here that I have in front of me, and I'm just quickly looking through the chat to see. Yeah, there's a question here. Jane, I see that you've already answered in the chat, but I thought I might ask whether or not anyone had some thoughts to contribute to this. Were all the presentations in English? How did it work in terms of learning from non-English speaking countries? I'm going to expand on that just a little bit more. I did think that it was at least in my experience of the conference, it felt as though it was something that wasn't even really touched on or discussed, that the entire conference was in English. We were talking about accessibility, but then we also didn't even engage with anything around, and maybe I just missed it. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see anything around specifically working in non-English languages other than European languages. And I didn't see anything around working with sign language, for instance. Jane, did you see anything along those lines? Was it all just purely English for you?
It was, but you must have missed my 3-minute talk about using visual symbols to
yes.
transcend language. But yeah, it was definitely a realization I had of, you know, obviously I speak English. It's the only language I speak. Before my talk, I actually had a show of hands in the audience as to how many languages people spoke in the room, and the majority of people spoke 3 or more languages, you know, the Europeans. I live here in the top end of Australia. Indigenous people here commonly speak 3 or 4 or 5 languages. English is often not the first on that list. So, you know, having the conference in English, yeah, it seemed like it was just the default situation. It was never really discussed. But understanding English is a prerequisite to being able to attend these big international conferences and get, you know, a lot out of them. So I think that is a kind of a barrier to the professional development of science communicators who don't speak English.
Alice, do you think that the ASC might be able to do something better, different here? Are there solutions around this? Because I mean, we've got lots of languages in Australia, notwithstanding the very many different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. But even if you just look across our multicultural language bases, there are many other languages that are spoken in Australia. I haven't come up with a solution to tackle this yet, but
I don't know that there's a solution, like a one solution, but I think certainly in terms of thinking about within Australia, Auslan presence wherever possible at events, or indeed seeking out input from folks who are going to attend to find out if there are accommodations or things that could be made to make a conference more inclusive. We're talking about language, so I go for Auslan in this case. I think also people whose first language is English, we need to do some work on this throughout our throughout the whole of our kind of way of communicating, not just ASC. I think we need to normalize people speaking in whichever language they feel most comfortable speaking in, and having subtitles or ways of translating people's speech or presentation. Of course, all of these things come with a cost, and not insignificant cost. So I think that's sometimes something we have to plan for in terms of grants or accessibility. Potentially, it's about when you have certain meetings for ASC in certain areas, or if you're trying to engage different communities, perhaps there could be a focus on that within the ASC community. I think as part of PCST, I certainly didn't see any talks that were in languages other than English throughout, but I heard people speaking in different languages throughout their talks and introducing their first or second or third sometimes language into their talks and explaining why some terms were particularly important within their research. And also there was a talk about an African language science podcast. There were some research papers about examining the way COVID-19 messaging was presented in different languages. So it was a theme that wasn't present in a huge number of talks, I would say, but it was something that came through. And I think in terms of the way we spoke about language, or the way language was spoken about at the conference, there seems to be this, not surprisingly because of the theme, the common ground, but I think it was this focus of having a common language for science communication. And I think it's probably quite interesting to interrogate what's meant by that, because of course, like many terms, and we talk about this in science communication a lot, when we use the word language, we can mean a multitude of different things or in different contexts. So thinking carefully about language, which is, can have these different meanings or intentions, and how this can be used as a way to foster inclusivity is a challenge for all of us, and maybe one that ASC can take on.
Oh yeah, we'll just take it on.
Can I just
Sorry,
buy
Tom?
into this one, please, Tom? There's a policy, PCST, and it was debated, but a long time ago. In fact, that the standard thing there was that presentations be in English. There have been conferences where there have been special sessions, say where you might have a Portuguese translation or a Portuguese presentation if you're presenting in Brazil. Similarly, Chinese or Korean if you're in those particular countries, but generally speaking the language is English. But I do want to draw your attention to, mention one thing, and that is that the webinars, and perhaps people can be really imaginative about this, and we had a webinar which focused on science communication in the Islamic countries in North Africa and the Middle East. And that's the first one that we've had, which was simultaneously translated into Arabic. And that seemed to work quite well. It cost, I think, $100 to buy a translator in for about 70 minutes worth of translation work. So that's an option. And I'd really encourage people to be imaginative and bold about suggesting alternative methods of doing this, because I recognise Alice's point. It's a significant barrier to lots of people, and if we can find ways of overcoming it, the webinar translation method is one of them, and I think that's quite a viable option. It just requires imagination to find the speakers, the translator, and a suitable theme.
Yeah, definitely, and it was something that I thought that the World Organization of Science Literacy made happen quite seamlessly in any of the meetings that I've joined, because they effectively run those meetings as a Chinese stream, as a Mandarin stream and an English stream. And so depending on which speaker is presenting at any time, they'll speak in the language that they're most comfortable speaking in, with an audio track that from a translator fitting in there. I think that's probably another argument for online then, Toss. I'm hearing that you're going for the online webinar fairly strongly at the moment. Sam, was there anything that you'd like to add to language, or any other aspect of that discussion?
I wanted to say, sort of related to the conference, that in my job currently, my direct co-workers all have English as a second language. Obviously, we're all postdoc researchers, so they have quite a grasp of academic English. But it's that sort of environment that I got a tiny grasp of just traveling around before the conference, in terms of speaking to people who definitely know English better than I know anything else. But stumbling over idioms and different cultural explanations and different assumptions that you wouldn't really think about. And just the notion of, I can't remember who else mentioned it before, but this question of, do we do everything in English? How can we get a translator up? How can we solve that problem? Is less of a technical problem to do with making sure that the exact words come across, and sometimes more about creating that environment of not just, hi, does everyone speak English here, but would you be more comfortable speaking in another language? Would you find it more comfortable if we had subtitles up? What else can we do that actually is easier, and not just something that you're maybe capable of understanding, or capable of understanding a bit of it, to not cause any other dramas to any other people? And also, on a more practical note, whenever I do actual pre-planned presentations where I don't get so tongue-tied as I am tonight, I love to use idioms and metaphors and things, but making sure you explain what you're saying a few times, a few different ways, because if you're using extra brain power to translate things for yourself through a number of different languages or experiences, or just different cultures or different professions, it can take more energy to really understand the more creative uses of language.
Yeah, definitely. And English isn't just English, right? So the idiom in Australia is going to be quite different to the idiom that's in the UK or London, or the English that's spoken in Germany or whatever. So very strong points. Now, I am aware of the time, and I will just quickly give the people who are online another little prompt. If there's any last questions that you're wanting for me to throw to this panel of people, please throw it into the chat. But while any of those last questions are coming in, I will prompt with one of the questions that Joanna has pre-prepared for me. Was anyone surprised by something at PCST? Was it what you expected? Tos, this has been you've been to PCST conferences since the 90s. There's been plenty of them that you've gone to. Did this shock you? Was there anything that was out of the blue that you weren't anticipating at this year's conference?
No, there wasn't, but I think maybe this is a question better directed to my colleagues on the panel, actually.
All right. Well, then, was anyone surprised by their experience at PCST? How was it not what you were expecting when you turned up? Jane, I'm going to throw you.
Sorry,
no, Sam, you've done it.
Very
Sam.
Not so much a shock, because I think, like I said, I've been around sort of PCST a bit, but some of the other conferences that my colleagues are preparing for this year are so much. I was in a headspace of 4,000 people at massive conference venues. They're very, very bureaucratic. They're like so precise. They're so worried about getting their papers right and all this. But it was sort of surprising in a nice way how welcoming and open and how much focus there is at PCST of those loose, like, weak ties and meeting people and bumping into people again and again through the week, rather than I'm less comfortable with the sort of mega conferences that are so designed around how good your presentation slot was, I suppose. So a pleasant surprise in terms of how much it was about meeting people and bumping into people and having conversations about the work outside of those presentations, I guess.
Jane, was there anything content-wise perhaps that surprised you?
I don't think necessarily surprised me. I guess it was, I don't want to say that I had poor expectations, because I didn't, but it was better than I expected, if that doesn't sound bad. And yeah, it was just interesting, the perspective of being in a country like Holland. And I'm going to put a shout out here to Shani Phillips, who I can see is here, wrote a couple of blog posts about the conference. And there was a lot of sessions, or several sessions, that I attended on, post-colonization and the effects of colonialism, etc. And Holland is definitely on the other end of the spectrum than Australia, being a colonizing country, not a colonized country. And this is an observation that Shani made in her blog post. And I don't really have a lot of comment on it, I guess, but more to say it was just a curious observation. I went on a harbour tour of Rotterdam the day after the conference finished, and the boat was called the Abel Tasman. They're obviously very proud of their exploring history. But yeah, just the different conversations that happen in different countries with different histories, I guess, is something that is happening. Again, I can't really comment on those conversations, just that they must be different in different countries. And it was just something that occurred to me when I was there and read Shani's posts about it.
Alice, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Otherwise,
no, I think I'll just when I was surprised at how full the opening and closing sessions of the conference were. I haven't seen a conference for a while across any discipline, including some of my home scientific disciplines, where there's been such a consistent number of people there till the very end of the conference. So I thought even though were really long days, lots of parallel sessions, I felt like the community was really engaged throughout the conference, which was great to see.
I might just add one thing, Tom, if I may, and that was that I guess going to PCST in Montreal 20 odd years ago absolutely changed my professional life. And so I think that I'd really encourage people to be fairly bold and reach out and find new friends, new alliances, new colleagues that they can launch new ventures with. I mean, could be a book, could be a joint paper, could be a research project, could be a session for the next PCST conference. And I think people should really be encouraged to be bold and push out beyond your natural frontiers and try things out. I mean, it's not going to travel back to Australia, so you're quite safe in doing that. But it's just a wonderful way of reaching out beyond the national boundaries we have here and finding alliances and plotting and planning across international boundaries.
Definitely. So yes, I mean the themes that I'm really pulling out of this is the huge benefit of the network that goes across to every aspect of across borders, but also across disciplines within science communication, and the value of us finding those connections with people. And making those connections, because who knows, maybe you can write a book and meet a bunch of people at the next PCST conference. I am very aware of time, and I don't want to run over with this one, so I will just quickly throw to our panelists. There are no further questions no, there isn't. I will throw to the panelists for if there's any last closing remarks that you would like to make, if there's anything that you haven't said during this session. But if you don't have anything in particular that you want to add, I guess that the last point would be whether there was anything that particular in learnings that the ASC could take away from the PCST conference, something you would like to see adopted at the next ASC at the next ASC conference. Hopefully that question wasn't too jumbled. It was definitely jumbled in my brain. Jane, I'm going to look at you and throw at you first to try and decipher what I was just trying to say.
Sure. I would say, especially given I think it was the last plenary when there were different communication related associations, heads and members up on stage and talking about when their particular conferences are, and they were all very soon and overlapping. And I know the ASC conference was only recently, and I couldn't go to both because the PCST abstracts opened earlier and I'd already been accepted, and I couldn't swing both in such a short amount of time. So my request would be to please separate the conferences in time a little bit, just so it would make it easier for me at least to be able to go to both. And yeah, just
we definitely should get an international list of those conferences, because there's more than just PCST, of course, that we need to avoid. So yes, it's definitely something that we should do.
And just that, yeah, we're doing great things here in Australia. I don't. Sometimes, Australia has a bit of an inferiority complex sometimes, I think, but we are definitely, given our representation at the conference and the things that we're doing, I think, we can be really proud of what we're doing and achieving in science communication in Australia.
Sam?
I have nothing quite so actually practical for you. Timing is always a good suggestion. A very general comment is just, I guess, highlighting and connecting more with our region so that we feel less like we're connected and have to go to European or far off conferences as much, and sort of, like you say, recognize that we do a lot here, but that also there's a lot being done in the Asia Pacific and around those areas, which I know we always do a lot on, but there's always more to be done in making it, flip the map and remind ourselves that we're the center of this sort of bit of our world, and we don't always need to travel quite so far to feel like we're in the thick of things.
Definitely. Toss, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would say that there's been a bit of baton passing at this conference. 9 of the longest serving and most experienced members of the PCST committee have had to step down because of a constitutional requirement. But we have some new Australasian people standing up, and so Tara Robertson is one. She's joined the committee now. Joan Leach is also on the committee, and one we can almost claim under the Russell Crowe rule is that Fabian Medvecki has also joined the committee. So I think it's worth using those people as to sound out ideas and try things with them, because they're involved in all the discussions that go on. So I think we should use that. Perhaps I can just pay tribute to the role that Jenny Metcalf played as chair of PCST. And I mean, everyone who entered the conference would have, and there was barely a stage that was free of Jenny at one stage or another. So, but she did a fabulous job, and it took an enormous amount of time, of her time, to be involved in the conference and help make it a success it was.
Yes, and she was potentially going to actually join us for this webinar, but wasn't quite able to get herself back in time to be able to make the time to join this. Her contribution to the PCST was well and truly noted at the conference. Yes, well and truly noted. Alice, any final remarks before we close?
I'm just going to second what everybody said. I think they've summed it up well, so I'll do that, and then we can finish on time.
All right. Well, thank you, Alice. In the last 28 seconds that I have, I will then just very quickly say a big thank you to our panelists for joining us. The next PCST conference is going to be in Aberdeen in 2025. And then after that, it's going to be in China in 2027. We, of course, are the Australian Science Communicators. We're going to be doing stuff within this region, and thoroughly encourage you all to continue to engage with the network that we have here. As has been brought up a couple of times, there are plenty of reasons to be engaging with our region, and that's something that we're actively working on at the moment, is to try and build a couple of those links within the Asia Pacific region. So it's a very exciting time. So please keep an eye on this space. And thank you again for everyone who came along and attended to listen to this. This should be online at some point once we regain access to our YouTube account. That's a whole other story. But yes, Joanna, did you have anything last you wanted to quickly say, other than just waving?
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay.
Finishing on time.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.